Fostering collaborative writing and creative communities as acts of communal care and creative writing pedagogy. By me, Sam Meekings. Now, writing is commonly thought of as a solitary activity. In the popular imagination, writers are often pictured as recluses who spend their time squirreling away in sheds or studies or a room of one's own, maintaining only minimal contact with the outside world. Yet, part of the appeal of writing programs, writing degrees, and writing courses is that they provide the scaffolding of a writing community that can inform, influence, and motivate writing practices and processes. As Sylvia Gunnery points out, quote, especially in the early development of writers, much is gained by learning together and inspiring one another. Writing communities in higher education provide a vast array of benefits, such as helping students generate writing ideas, reflect on writing purposes, build self-confidence in writing, reflect on writing styles, make reading-writing connections, develop revision skills, explore voice and genre, and provide both a platform and an encouraging environment for sharing works in progress. And besides these academic and intellectual gains, writing groups within a higher education setting also serve a social and psychological function by making writing seem less lonely, less daunting, less isolated. Writers often work best when they have a support network of other writers. So, what happens to writing courses and writing classes when this vital writing community is suddenly swapped for an unfamiliar virtual community? Well, from anecdotal experience with my own classes that were forced to suddenly move online during the pandemic, the answer was fairly simple. Everyone freaks out. And, really, who can blame them? Some students made frantic journeys back home. Some were stuck in dorms, student housing. Others unexpectedly back living with family. Many anxious by the flood of news about the pandemic. Some have issues with access to online learning tools. Others dealing with illness or other emergency. Almost unanimously, my students told me they missed that feeling of community. Many felt isolated and alone, and that made writing so much harder. It therefore seemed imperative to me, as an instructor, to find ways to foster care through recreating that feeling of community. And this paper is sharing what I learned through that experience. Now, I do want to note before I go any further that this is based solely on my own experiments in my classes, focusing on my own individual successes and failures learned through trial and error. It's not meant as a qualitative or foolproof guide to teaching university-level online writing courses during isolation. After all, there are plenty of successful online programs, as there are. It's about fostering care in unfamiliar circumstances and facilitating communities in exceptional situations. And I hope some of my approaches may be of benefit, therefore, to others. So, within the higher education setting, writing's not easy at the best of times. I know that myself. As Gill points out, during a busy semester, quote, academia's never-ending flow of urgent and disparate tasks accelerates the pace of time and creates a constant feeling of time running out. Yeah, I know that one well. And during social isolation, while we're stuck at home, tasks go on, but the safety net of collegial, social, and community supports completely changed. At my own institution, the switch from in-class to remote learning was sudden, and so the process of converting the rest of the semester's learning to online delivery was frantic. I moved submission deadlines back in order to accommodate panic, anxiety, and confusion that students were facing. Despite this, over the next couple of weeks, I received loads of emails from students saying the same thing. They were unsettled, preoccupied, unable to focus, struggling to write. Assignments were often half finished, in limbo, their writers blocked, unable to make much headway. And part of the issue, it seemed to me, was the absence of this writing community from which to draw motivation, inspiration, encouragement. So, straight away I thought I'm going to pair students up, get them to work through drafts and works in progress with their classmates. However, synchronous Zoom classes are not a natural environment for this. It's easy to put students into breakout room for group discussion, for collaborative tasks, but impossible to monitor all of these at once, and it's difficult to know whether students are actually achieving anything when the instructor's not in that breakout room with them. Collaboration and interaction during synchronous online classes is clearly a skill that needs to be fostered. Couldn't be expected overnight. So my first attempt was something of a failure. A failure created by my kind of unrealistic expectation that I could simply move activities that worked well in the classroom online without taking into account the time needed to adapt. So this first attempt at collaborative tasks made me rethink how I might rebuild the communal aspect of the course. I had a number of concerns about leaping back into a workshop model of peer critique, including the fact that sharing their writing among classmates for feedback often produces anxiety among a number of students, even during normal times. Moreover, the workshop model induces other anxieties. Matthew Salesi's Craft in the Real World, Rethinking Fiction Writing and Workshopping from this year, makes it clear that traditional notions of craft are bound up with institutional and systemic conceptions of race, gender, class, and sexuality. It's vital to both challenge and reinvigorate these. As he says, quote, "How can we rethink craft and the teaching of it to better reach writers from diverse backgrounds? How can we invite diverse storytelling traditions into literary spaces?" Well, one partial answer to this is through collaborative writing. After all, in the Western and often colonial conception of identity and creativity, the individual's voice is paramount and prioritized. However, this is to ignore cultures, societies, and heritages, particularly those in Asia and the global south, where community is prioritized over the individual. Therefore, fostering writing activities and communities in the classroom that are collaborative might help challenge some of these colonial notions. So, one of the next tasks I set students during isolation was collaborative writing and editing. I split students into groups of about 4 or 5, shared with each group a Google Doc containing a fairly poorly, in my estimation, written introduction. I wrote it myself. I set them the task of editing and rewriting this introduction and then developing it over several more pages, asking them to ensure consistency with voice, genre, style, and purpose that was set up in the intro. Now, this was a low-stakes assignment, designed not as a summative assessment, but as a practice exercise to get students working together. Furthermore, it could be done synchronously or asynchronously. It could be monitored, commented on individually, remotely, and in real time by the instructor. It freed up class time for discussion of tasks and writing issues and later analysis of these collaborative writing experiments. And it could be repeated in various ways with different groupings to practice different skills, styles, genres, structures, and so on. Also, since this writing wasn't generated originally by students and furthermore was developed and authored not by a single person but by this group working collaboratively, what it meant was all the groups were happy to share this work with the class for feedback, discussion, and analysis with almost none of those usual expressions of anxiety or worry that accompany sharing work written by individual students. After all, as Lemeron points out, quote, "Writing is almost always a collaborative process. It requires editors, designers, producers, co-writers, and most importantly, it requires an audience. By fostering a community with a collective goal, we demystify the idea that writing is an individual act of genius, but also actively discourage the sort of toxic competitiveness that so often presents itself in creative writing workshops. Writing collaboratively can therefore help prioritize learning through cooperation, community, rather than competition." So the use of Google Docs for online editing, collaborative writing, seemed to lead to higher student engagement. It also encouraged me to make more online tasks collaborative. I used Perusal to upload and host before class readings. I set discussions, making students set up conversation threads and join at least one other conversation thread, commenting, discussing, arguing, and this set up organic tasks for synchronous class discussion, thereby getting around one of the problems of Zoom classes, the occasional silences when no one speaks. It's also easier to elicit student comments and reactions when their opinions, thoughts, and ideas have already been introduced and fomented in writing in the online task. Just as importantly, this simple homework activity sustained sense of community and collaboration, discussion, and debate despite our physical isolation from one another. What I also got students to do while they were stressing out about some of their writing assignments was to do some group writing as a way of providing more care, more de-stressing. For these kind of collaborative group writing classes, Ask students to get into as comfortable a space as possible. Feel free to turn off their video sharing, focus only on writing. For this activity of guided writing, I played music in the background as I spoke, something soft, melodic, instrumental. And I encourage students to draw from their own memories. In one guided writing class, I asked students to recall a time when they've been full of joy, surprise, or wonder, and to note down the sense experiences, sights, smells, tastes, touches, textures that accompany the memory. We then move on to describing colours and images associated with that memory. Next, we picture the people who shared that occasion with us and sketch their character by describing the actions they performed and the way they behaved at that time. Though I mix in a little bit of theory as those sessions progressed. For example, I introduced Keats's conception of negative empathy and embracing uncertainties without reaching for logic or facts when we talked of recalling, recreating emotional experience, for example. I also defined cognitive empathy, emotional empathy, and compassionate empathy when we wrote about characters, when we developed those characters in relations to memory. So though I did that little bit of theory, the main focus was really on getting students to relax into writing through these short and simple tasks. And that's a feature of layered writing. Bit by bit, the writer builds up details that can later be combined to create a deeper, more developed scene. And students told me, later on when we reflected what we'd written, that they were able to use the details they built up to create layered writing, to use some of them in their own assignments or final projects. More importantly, they mentioned that when writing in the shared and communal space, they were able to forget many of their worries and anxieties and get lost, so to speak, in the writing itself. And this appears to confirm Joanna Yu's assertion that, quote, creative writing enables a sense of timelessness and transcendence by allowing writers to become completely engrossed in their writing encounters. The act of writing, when properly scaffolded, allows writers to immerse themselves in a creative space. Some students reported they found this exercise a productive warm-up, others that it found calming and refreshing, still others that the details that they generated could be used, edited, revised, adapted, developed in other texts that they were working on. So in the end, these brief attempts at fostering care through collaborative writing generated generally positive responses from my students, but more than that, they help sustain a sense of an active writing community, which is a fundamental element of any writing program or course. These exercises might not work with every class or course, yet with a little experimentation, the central ideas are broadly applicable. Students discover different ways of working, different motivations when engaging with tasks either collaboratively or within that mutually supportive space. In my experience, then, the following things worked well. Collaborative editing, group writing via Google Docs helped foster that sense of community and teamwork. Setting up of online conversations and debates over readings on Perusal, Canvas, or Blackboard provided asynchronous learning that replicated the free-flowing exchange of ideas and opinions in the physical classroom. And the guided writing sessions helped encourage communal immersion in creative tasks, while also practicing layered writing skills. What links all these, it seems to me, is not just attempts to reinforce communal and collaborative aspects of writing, but also the importance of care and empathy. Now, empathy, I believe, is vital for writers in representing different characters, cultures, perspectives, arguments, and contexts, for instance. But it's also vital for instructors, especially at this anxiety-inducing time. So my experiments, briefly recounted here, creating collaborative tasks in the classroom, remind me of a simple truism that remains important in the changed world we now live in. We are always stronger and better off with the support of others. Thank you for listening.